How's it going? Today I'm going to give you some guidance on how to properly plant wildflower seeds. And since as I'm recording this, it is November, I'm going to talk about the cool season wildflowers. But the same basic instructions will be appropriate for the warm season ones as well. So wildflowers are annual plants that have adapted to live in this arid and hot climate. They don't have succulents. They are not deep-rooted plants. They don't have woolly leaves to protect themselves from the sun. These plants are usually not really adapted very well to the hot, dry conditions. So how do they make it? They just peace out when things get crappy, and they reappear when things are nice. So in the case of the cool season wildflowers, when we get those wet years, when we get enough rain in the winter and then into spring, we get in consistent rains, we get these wildflower years. And if we get a lot of rain, we get a super bloom. It doesn't happen every year. So if you're trying to get wildflowers going in your yard, you're going to have to do some help. You're going to have to make it rain a little bit to get them going. Now, seeds don't like to just germinate any old place, so don't think you can just toss your seeds out into the yard and they'll come up on their own. You won't have to do anything. That may work in some climates, but it sure doesn't work in ours because of the sporadic nature of our rains. So pick your area that you're going to grow your wildflowers in. It should be mostly in full sun. Full sun to at least part sun, but the more sun, the better. And when you take this area, break up the soil, because seeds don't germinate on flat soil. Two reasons why. One, there's nothing to hold the moisture against the seed. And two, you're just expensively feeding critters. You're going to be feeding ants will carry away the seeds, and birds. It's just an expensive way to feed birds if you just toss them on the ground. So instead, break up your soil, even add a little compost to the ground. That'll really help create some nice texture. And you're trying to decompact your soil, and you're trying to make it fluffy and texturized. And you can rake it out, but don't pack it down. Just rake it out real nice, and then you have this bed of fluffy, texturized soil. Broadcast your seeds over this nice bed that you just made and water them in. And what'll happen is, as you're watering the seeds down and the soil down, the seeds will sort of fall into the little nooks and crannies, and the soil particles will hold the moisture against the seed, and this will inspire those seeds to germinate. Next, you keep that soil moist. You may not have to water every day. It all depends on what your soil's like and what the temperatures are going to be like, but your job is to keep those seeds nice and moist so that they start to germinate. And as they germinate, you can start to put space in between watering, but don't be too stingy with the water, because you really want, especially if this is your first wildflower bed, you want to really get this going in your yard. Make that first year real good. Take good care of those seedlings, and water them really well, and bring them through to flowering and seeding. And if you do that right, then you will have a lot of reseeding for the next year. With the cool season wildflowers, you do not need to worry about cold, especially with our very native wildflowers. And by the way, plant native. Don't plant African daisies. They're starting to escape cultivation, and it's much more important to plant the species that have evolved with our fauna, with our butterflies, with our birds. And that way you're actually servicing wildlife rather than just growing something that you think is pretty. Get a little beyond pretty, right? Because what's prettier than a yard that has a lot of flowers in it? A yard that has a lot of flowers and wildlife in it. A yard that services and participates in the ecology of the area is much more fun to look at than planting exotic species. Remember that our wildflowers are not just pretty, they are important nectar sources for various species of butterflies and native bees. And some of those butterflies and bees are very specific about what flowers they like to take nectar from because of the presence of secondary compounds, which we're just barely beginning to understand. It's more than just sugar water for them. But the other thing is that many butterflies use our annual wildflowers as larval hosts. Like the Arizona jewel flower, Streptanthus carinatus, is a larval host for the Sara and Arizona orange tips. So they're very important for that too. The African daisies are from, as the name denotes, Africa, and they don't tend to be as servicing to our wildlife. They're not a larval host, as far as I know, for anything. And you know, there'll be animals that or insects that use them and take advantage of their nectar, but it's just not going to be the same as the species that evolved with our butterflies for thousands of years. You can plant from October, November, all the way to about March or April. And you can actually do it a little bit each month. Like I start real strong in October, November, and I plant a little bit each month so that I have nice successions of wildflowers coming up. You don't have to do it that way, but it will extend your bloom season, and it will look nicer and make your pollinators a lot happier. As it gets later in the season and warmer, like March and April, the plants will be shorter when they bloom, just because they don't have as much time to develop in the cool weather as the previous months. So just know that the later plants will be shorter when they bloom, but they'll still bloom and they'll still produce seed. By the time May and June roll around, most of these wildflowers are going to go to seed, and then don't be too clean about your yard. Like, don't deadhead up your flowers. Let the dry plants exist for a while, and then when they're fully dry, before you get rid of them, shake them. And you know, I don't get rid of them at all anyway. That's organic material for the soil, so I don't actually get rid of them. But you might have an HOA that doesn't like that sort of thing. So if you do have to pull them up, just pull them up and shake them, and make sure that that seed is going back in the ground, so that next season you'll have some coming up on their own, as long as the water shows up. Everything I just told you, you can do for the warm season wildflowers. So a good example of a warm season wildflower is the Arizona poppy, which is not really a poppy. It's actually in the creosote bush family, but it vaguely looks like a poppy. That's why they call it a poppy. But those come up in the summer monsoon rain. So do all the same things I told you. If it rains, that's great, but if it doesn't, make sure the moisture is there and keep those seedlings happy. And if you keep doing this, you're feeding your seed bank, and you're just putting in that little puzzle in your little backyard ecology, and restoring and making things a little more healed in your backyard, completing this ecological picture of all these species that depend on each other. Because often people do forget those annuals. They'll plant nectar plants, and they'll plant shade trees, and they'll leave debris on the ground. But sometimes people forget the annuals, and the annuals have a very important role in our ecology. There are sometimes mixes of wildflower seeds that include annuals and perennials, and if you plant them, let's say right now, the cool season ones would come up first, and then later on, when it warms up, the warm season ones will come up, and that's fine. Beware of seed mixes that include exotics like African daisies, because we really should not do that. We should try to plant less of those sorts of things and emphasize the natives. You can apply all these same rules to restoration seed mixes, which will include shrubs and trees and grasses and all those sorts of things. It's the same thing. Texturized soil, moisture. Even a saguaro seed needs moisture to germinate. So just know that rule for seeds is always the case. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and happy wildflower season. Space.